So the milestones, as they're listed here, are kind of very high-level groupings of information. So we have the live network that we have at the moment called the Meccano Canary network, and there are a number of things that were delivered with that. Eventually, we'll move to a test network, which is just before the live network, and there'll be a number of activities that are related to that, and they're listed below here. We have some internal functionality, which are to do with just core functions of the Totem application itself. We have products as a specific set of functionalities relating to products, which you can think of as possibly an hour being also a product. Things that can be used within inside an invoice or something like that. We have the developer API, which is a long-term vision for us where we're wanting to connect in with third-party applications. We have reporting and enhancements, which are to do with, sorry, somebody just came in, which are to do with the enhancement of something that's already been delivered, but perhaps needs more functionality. We have the accounting engine, which is really the core functionality of Totem itself, which deals with postings to account ledgers within identities. We have a marketplace related to how we see orders and tasks being managed within the application itself. We have a number of external data sets that are coming either from third-party databases that we want to have actually intrinsic to our application itself. So for example, we have the UK companies database. We have third-party oracles which are bringing information into our application that would be updated on a reasonably regular basis, for example, like exchange rates or bank integration for reconciliation activities. Lastly, we have the privacy milestone, which is to do with really ensuring for users that their information is kept private from other parties on the network, unless of course they need to communicate with those parties, in which case it's between one or more parties. And then finally, we have the milestone of launching the main Totem network sometime in the future.
And so now, based on that, maybe we can talk about the breakdown of what happened last month, with starting maybe with the UI and Tufik. You were mentioning some of the work you'd been doing relative to the task module.
Actually in the front end, there wasn't much of work to do. The main thing I did in the front end was just build a task module with some font to create tasks, and the other thing was task module requires currency conversion mechanism. So probably Chris will describe how that works. So that's part of what was done in the task module. And the other thing I did on the front end during the last month was the chat, rebuild of the chat UI and the back end as well. So previously we had only a troll box where everyone could just discuss whatever they want. And that wasn't actually offline because if you were not online, then you couldn't actually see anything. And it was actually live, visible to everyone, whoever is online at that moment. And we think that we also needed the private and group chat mechanism, because if you're working with something like an invoice or a task, and the other end needs to discuss something with you, and there was no way previously other than to discuss it on the troll box or using third-party applications. So neither of which is ideal. So we decided to add a private chat mechanism. So that's what I've been working on the last month. And to keep privacy in check, we also decided to go with encrypted chat. So which is not yet implemented, but parts of which is implemented, like we have a box keys registry in the blockchain, which is basically acts as a registry of the public keys of all the users. So so if you are a user, from your perspective, you don't even need to worry about who the public keys of the other users. You can simply start chatting, and then the UI will retrieve the public key of the other user and then encrypt and decrypt things automatically. The other thing is we have also actually implemented a group chat mechanism. So in case if you have multiple people working together, you can do that. We didn't have that before, so yeah.
That's I think actually in the early part of the month was when we did the CouchDB installation and the Banzai mechanism. That was done quite early on by Tufik.
Yeah. Actually, the Banzai. Should I explain the Banzai? What it is?
You can do, because it's quite interesting.
So Banzai is basically a mechanism to basically validate data by using blockchain as a sort of a two-factor authentication. So normally with off-chain data, we do normal just authentication by the user. You log in with username and password, and then it authenticates automatically that way. But we wanted to add an extra layer of security to that, so that only certain identity, as in the blockchain wallet, so wants to store a data, and the identity needs to create a transaction to the blockchain. So I call it expression of interest, because when you want to store a data for, say, for example, if you have a task and you are creating a task and you have the data of the task and you are storing it on the off chain, normally you don't without Banzai, we would normally just authenticate you with the user ID. But in using Banzai, the user creates a transaction to the blockchain using a hash, by generating a hash of the data they want to store. So the blockchain stores it, and then they send a request to the off-chain database, which then, using the data sent, it regenerates the hash and then validates with the blockchain. So what it does, basically, it checks whether the integrity of the data, that the data has been sent is actually what the owner of the data, which is the identity, is actually intended to store. So that's what we have done with blockchain Banzai.
So just to kind of add to that, good explanation there from Tufik, the very interesting thing about this is that it means that you could have a decentralized data store which doesn't care about users submitting data to be stored in that data store. It will only ever accept it will only ever accept data that's been pre-validated on the blockchain, and it will ignore everything else. And in that way, you don't actually need to have a user ID to log into that database to authenticate that you want something to be stored in that database. Database doesn't care, in fact, who sent the data even, because the only thing that it cares about is, does this data hash to something that I can see on the blockchain? And if it does, then I'll allow it to be stored, whoever sent it to me. And if not, then I will just reject it.
Yeah, one of the other benefit with this mechanism is that if you have a group with multiple people working on it, and one person may have other people doing some things for them, and then but they still want to maintain control of the data that's being stored. So that way, eventually, if it's needed, then it can be implemented in a way that the other person can submit the data to the on behalf of the original owner, but our original owner still has to sign a transaction using the hash of the data.
So there's a lot of flexibility in that
Yeah,
mechanism, and it's significantly different to the way databases authenticate what they're going to store today.
Yep.
So that was quite a significant milestone. The database itself actually now stores a lot of other information, like, for example, the UK companies database. It stores the chart of accounts that supports the accounting engine. It has the language support settings and currency conversions. Eventually, it'll have the products information. All of this will also be stored in this same database and can be managed in the same way by the Banzai mechanism. But we're just building that that database right now to support all of the other functions that are there. I suppose to give you an example, we don't really want to store everything on chain because that's just a waste of blockchain storage space. We do want to store something off chain, but we want it to have a relationship with that information that's on chain in a way that's that supports the thinking behind decentralized systems.
And for, I guess then, so for the back end too.
Okay, so the back end
last month.
So we actually started off with the tasks module, which sort of came out of discussions at the early part of the quarantine period, and we thought it would be a pretty straightforward implementation. And it's grown into kind of not a monster, of course, nothing's a monster in Totem, but it's grown legs in that essentially a task is basically an order of some kind. And once you start to think of an order, you also have the ability to approve that order, to assign that order, for the assignee to accept it, and eventually complete it and invoice it. And those mechanisms are intrinsically related to the accounting engine itself. So being able to create an order and perhaps pre-fund that order means that certain accounting postings needed to be created. So although we had an idea of how the accounting mechanism should be done from the proof of concepts back in the early days, this really meant that we had to focus on understanding how we would structure our accounting mechanisms. We had to define the chart of accounts, for example, which was by no means an easy task because we have a lot of information that comes from various historical projects. And we had to boil that down into what was really the core chart of accounts for Totem, and define how that would interact between identities. We had to create the idea of recipes. So, for example, if you raise an invoice, you're basically making some accounting postings to your sales part, but the person that receives the invoice has to make some accounting postings to their purchasing part. And because Totem is all about doing all of that all at once, you have to know on both sides of the equation how that's going to play out. So we've built the core accounting mechanism behind that. We've built the posting mechanisms that allow single line postings and multi-line postings, which will be more useful as we go into the future and deal with invoices and other orders that have multi-line information. In addition to all of this, because of the way in which we'd built prior modules, which was the projects and timekeeping modules, we'd had some difficulty sharing information across those modules and between those modules. So we knew that a rewrite was necessary, or at least when we were building the accounting mechanism, to be able to handle multiple other modules posting into the accounting mechanism and getting information back. And we didn't want to face the same issues that we'd faced before. So there was a complete redesign, if you like, of the way the modules were working on the blockchain side to allow for this to happen in the accounting engine, because it's such a core functionality of Totem itself. We couldn't build it without that. So there was a rewrite and a rework of how traits are going to be used in the underlying blockchain runtime. And in addition to that, although this has only been done in the front end at this point, we've built the mechanism for the exchange rates. And
okay, the current version.
It is the currency conversion, yes, and we've discovered along the way that there's an interesting part of what we're doing is that in normal accounting systems, you have to declare something called a functional currency, which is the core currency that everything else must translate to when you have a global operation, for example. And if we're talking about Totem being a decentralized system, we automatically assume that it's going to be global no matter what. And if we chose something like the US dollar as a functional currency to which all the other currencies translate, we would still have US dollar fluctuations as an additional currency conversion issue to be addressed on the front end. But we realized that if we actually decided that our native currency, the XTX Totem transactions, was the functional currency, then at least within everything that was booked, if it related to the functional currency, you would have no currency fluctuations between one period to the next on XTX itself. So it kind of becomes, without it wanting to be that, and without anybody sort of suggesting that this is sort of an end goal, it would effectively behave like a reserve currency for the network, but also a reserve currency against all of the other currencies. And because of the accounting regulations, you can actually choose any currency in the world, be it cryptocurrency or fiat currency, as your functional currency. There's no restrictions on it on a legal perspective. But if we chose XTX as a functional currency, we effectively eliminate one major aspect of currency conversion issues that are present in all other systems that would not be present in Totem itself. So that's kind of a major realization, and we have a currency conversion mechanism for XTX, but actually we can apply some additional stability mechanisms to keep that sort of fairly steady regarding all other currencies in the world. But the underlying currency itself just has a fixed value with respect to itself. So there's no currency conversion issues there. So that was a major realization, let's say.
And maybe we give a quick, what's going to come in the next, maybe not, in the next couple of weeks, or what are you guys going to be focusing on in the next month, based on this milestone and
well,
kind of track?
I think everything that's in orange needs to be completed. So the rewrite of the chat interface is almost nearly finished. So that is going to go through on the front end fairly soon. We've got the tasks module, which is almost there, and that has to be completed. Maybe not the other EU companies in the database, but I would probably see the settlement mechanisms, the simple invoice, and the accounting entry being delivered as part of the tasks module, as well as the rework modules to be consumed as traits, which is under the second milestone there.
Also, eventually, we obviously want to integrate the task module with a marketplace, so that anyone can post their task and other people can accept or reject. Yeah, so sort of like similar way the freelancing applications work, like Upwork or Fiverr.
And I think, you know, the first delivery of this, as Tufix mentioned before, I think that basically we tend to deliver it and then we sit down and have a long workshop to decide whether it's functioning the way we expect it to or not, or what issues are there that come out of this. So there's inevitably going to be some rewrites and some changes to what's delivered at this stage.